Hey, Zach here. Today we're going to be exploring some of the old Union Canal in Pennsylvania. Now, this canal was actually very near and dear to my heart because it ends in my hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania. And I grew up riding on the bike trails which used to be the towpath for the canal. Now, this canal ran many miles between Reading, Pennsylvania and Middletown along the Susquehanna River, so we're not going to be exploring all of it, but we will explore some of the preserved remnants in the Reading area, as well as the Union Canal Tunnel just outside of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, one of the oldest transportation tunnels in the country. There's going to be a lot to see, so let's get started. In this video, we will explore the remnants of the Union Canal in the Reading area, and visit the oldest existing transportation tunnel in the United States. But first, let's delve into the history and significance of the Union Canal. When the United States won its independence from Great Britain in the American Revolutionary War, it gained control over a vast stretch of land extending from Georgia in the south to New Hampshire in the north, and as far inland as the Mississippi River. At that time, coastal trade was fairly developed with established ports all along the Atlantic seaboard. But the new nation possessed limited transportation networks into its interior, mainly consisting of improved Native American pathways and a few naturally navigable rivers. As settlers moved inland and established new cities and businesses, their thoughts increasingly turned toward ways of moving their goods and resources more efficiently. Overland transportation relied mainly on pack mules or wagons, which offered limited capacity for merchandise and were painfully slow for long-distance travel, averaging just about 15 miles a day. Water transports, on the other hand, encountered much less friction than land vehicles. A mule traveling on land could only carry about 250 pounds, but that same mule can pull a boat weighing dozens of tons. Effective water transportation networks could streamline shipping while cutting transport costs by 90%. In the early 1800s, American builders were looking at the already established canal networks in England and France as models for future American water-based transportation. In the United States, the canal building era peaked between 1810 and 1840, resulting in such famous waterways as the Erie Canal and the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, as well as countless others. During this time, over 3,300 miles of canals were built, and this series of linked waterways reduced shipping costs, fostered national markets, and spurred Western expansion, all before the railroads came along and ultimately superseded them. Today we're going to focus on one of the lesser known, but still historically significant, waterways of this era. At one time considered the golden link between Philadelphia and the vast interior of Pennsylvania, let's look at the history of the Union Canal. To understand the need for such a canal, let's look at the layout of the natural waterways of Pennsylvania. As we can see, the state is not lacking in major rivers and creeks. Running along the eastern border of the state is the Delaware River, and it was along this river, with its outlet into the Atlantic Ocean, that William Penn established the major port city of Philadelphia in 1682. The city was situated between the waters of the Delaware and one of its main tributaries, the Schuylkill River, which originated in the mountains northwest of the city. The presence of another major river, the Susquehanna, flowing down the middle of the state, was known to colonists early on, and by 1690, William Penn had his sights set on establishing a second major settlement for Pennsylvania along this river. At the time, he envisioned a potential waterway linking this new settlement with Philadelphia, by way of the Schuylkill River. This idea was among the earliest canal proposals in America, but it wouldn't be for another century that this idea would even start to be realized. In 1743, Benjamin Franklin founded the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, with the purpose of promoting useful knowledge in the humanities and natural sciences. This group had many famous members over the years, including George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton. In the 1770s, some members of this society began to study the feasibility of canal building in Pennsylvania. This study was likely spurred on by the completion of the first canal in Great Britain several years earlier. The society sent a committee to Lebanon, Pennsylvania to survey the summit area of the proposed canal path, occurring at the middle ground between the headwaters of the Quittapahilla and the Tappahannock Creeks, the former being a tributary of the Swatara Creek that ultimately flows into the Susquehanna, and the latter being a tributary of the Schuylkill River. This was among the first surveyed canal routes in America, and if construction would have started immediately, it would have been the first canal on the continent. But canal building took a backseat to other concerns, not the least of which was the American Revolution. As the country was recovering from the Revolution, it was finally time to realize those long-delayed canal dreams. In 1791, over 100 years after William Penn first conceived of the idea, the Pennsylvania legislature authorized the formation of a canal company named the Schuylkill and Susquehanna Navigation Company to build a waterway between those two rivers. In 1792, another company would be formed by the same stockholders, this one called the Delaware and Schuylkill Navigation Company, to improve the Schuylkill River as it flowed to the Delaware at Philadelphia. Now, the days of significant investment in transportation companies were still decades in the future, so the canal had to be frugal with its initial small funding. But it was enough to at least start construction of the S&S Canal in 1792, at the summit level near Lebanon, Pennsylvania. This was no easy task in the late 1700s. Canal building was so new in America that the fledgling company turned to experienced builders from England for guidance. One of the reasons for the inherent difficulty in the project was because it was connecting two different watersheds, which required a summit-type canal as opposed to a more straightforward lateral canal. Lateral canals, like the Chesapeake in Ohio, are built alongside a river that is in itself too difficult to navigate. These canals feature a continuous fall in elevation from start to end point, and are generally supplied with water by the neighboring river. Summit canals are like two lateral canals joined together at their high points. They descend from the summit level on both sides, each side traveling along its respective stream or river. But the summit area usually requires additional engineering to maintain its water level, making it the most complicated section to build. The S&S canal builders started construction at the most difficult area, and by 1795, this crucial summit section was finished. It included at least 4 locks made of brick, and required cutting through limestone, which proved to be very leaky. George Washington, a lifelong advocate of canal development, visited the construction site twice during this time, and commented that he was very happy with the progress. The finished section of the canal actually shows up on maps from the late 1790s. With the summit section complete, work would have continued on the descending sections to the east and west. However, the funding had all been used up, and the construction ceased in 1796, with the company declaring bankruptcy in 1797. Despite the bankruptcy, the canal company did manage to hold on to its acquired property and constructed works, as it pursued other methods of funding. One such method for raising funds, which was popular at the time, was a lottery. These worked similarly to lotteries of today, with prizes for the lucky winners and a small fraction of the proceeds going to investment projects. In 1795, the state authorized a lottery to raise $400,000, 2/3 of which would go to the S&S Canal, and 1/3 of which would go to the D&S Canal, which hadn't even been started yet. These lotteries ran for years, even after the bankruptcy, and by 1811, they had only raised $60,000. Now, during the early 1800s, the largest cities on the East Coast were experiencing an energy crisis. Local deforestation meant that wood for fuel and charcoal production was increasingly scarce. Cities had to resort to importing smoky, sooty bituminous coal from England and Virginia, and factories were often forced into going quiet for days as they waited for fuel shipments. Large quantities of anthracite coal had been discovered recently in the mountains northwest of Philadelphia, and in 1808, an industrialist named Josiah White discovered how to properly burn this coal variant, opening up its use as a cleaner burning fuel source. The need to efficiently transport this anthracite coal to the cities in large enough quantities to be useful was a major factor for increased interest in canal building at the time, resulting in dozens of canal projects starting between 1810 and 1820. By 1811, the finished section of the S&S Canal had sat untouched for years. It was basically a weed-filled ditch with a few crumbling locks. In that year, the Union Canal Company was formed as a fusion of the two earlier defunct canal companies. Another lottery was started for this new company, but this one was just as fruitless as the first. The project languished until 1819. In 1819, the winds changed though. Pennsylvania merchants saw the Erie Canal being built to the north, and the National Road being built out of Baltimore to the south. It became clear that the state that developed a cheap and reliable route to the west would enjoy great economic success. Not wanting to be left out, the Pennsylvania state legislature started planning for a series of canals that would bridge Philadelphia with Pittsburgh. This would ultimately become known as the Main Line of Public Works, seen here. As part of this monumental endeavor, the state threw its support behind the long-delayed Union Canal project, guaranteeing a 6% interest on all stock purchased in the company. This incentive, as well as favorable reports coming from the Erie Canal in New York, brought in enough funds for construction to resume in 1821, and this time, work on the canal went straight through to completion in 1827. By this point, canal building in America was a lot more common than it had been a quarter century before. Union Canal engineers visited successful projects in New England and New York to learn from those examples. Despite these lessons, the decision was made to build the locks at 8.5 feet wide by 75 feet long to handle boats only up to 25 tons, even though larger boats were already commonplace on other canals. This decision would hamstring the new canal even before it was completed, and even though the canal was enlarged in the 1850s, it was too little too late. Construction of the Union Canal was hastened by more experienced labor, with some contractors having worked on the Erie Canal previously. The new construction used some of the 1790s ditch, but it did deviate significantly. Also, unlike the previous work, the locks were constructed out of cut sandstone. Work commenced on all sections of the canal simultaneously. In the east, the canal followed the Tulpehocken Creek to the Schuylkill River at Reading. While initially, the plan was for the Union Canal to continue on to Philadelphia, this was rendered unnecessary by the earlier completion of the Schuylkill Canal in 1825, running from Philadelphia to Pottsville on its namesake river. In Reading, the Schuylkill Canal occupied the eastern shore of the river, while the Union Canal was on the western shore. Incidentally, the Schuylkill Canal had the first canal tunnel in America, although it was little more than a tourist attraction which was ultimately removed in 1857. To the west of the summit, the canal extended along the Swatara Creek to Middletown, Pennsylvania, where it interfaced with the Pennsylvania Canal. The fact that the Union Canal intersected with other existing canals at either end just goes to show how far it lagged behind in the burgeoning canal era, even though it had once been poised to be the first in the whole country. Indeed, zooming out, we can see that the Union Canal was eventually a small but crucial part of an expanding canal network across multiple states. Aside from the main east-west canal path, there was also a feeder canal branch which ran up along the Swatara Creek to Jonestown. This branch not only supplied water for the summit level, but was itself navigable. In fact, the branch feeder became a principal revenue source for the canal, allowing for the transport of anthracite out of the coal regions. The branch was extended north to Pine Grove in 1832 to provide additional service to the lucrative coal mines in that area. The branch feeder canal was opened for navigation on November 17, 1826. The last link to be completed in 1827 was the Union Canal Tunnel, which we'll explore in depth a little bit later. The first trip along the full length of the completed canal took place in June of 1827. Immediately, it was found that the canal was very leaky in the summit area, especially along the stretch of the original 1790s construction. To fix this, 240,000 pieces of 2-inch thick oak plank were used to line the bottom and sides of this portion of the canal. The canal officially opened for business in early 1828. At that point, it was 82 miles long with 93 locks and 18 aqueducts. This number would fluctuate over the years, especially as the branch feeder was extended from Jonestown to Pine Grove. By the 1840s, the decision to build smaller locks along the Union Canal was beginning to eat into its profit margin. The narrow size of the locks prevented the passage of the larger boats that were standard on other Pennsylvania canals. Between 1841 and 1858, the entire length of the canal was widened to accommodate larger boats capable of carrying up to 80 tons. The widening of the canal allowed for a brief period of prosperity in the late 1850s and early 1860s. But in June of 1862, a flood on the Swatara Creek damaged the western portion of the canal and completely destroyed the Pine Grove feeder, which was the canal's bread and butter. The flood prompted costly repairs that were compounded with continual water supply problems. At the same time, canals in general were seeing heavy competition from the growing railroad network in the country. In particular, the completion of the Lebanon Valley Railroad in 1857, connecting Reading to Harrisburg, severely cut into the Union Canal's already dwindling revenues, leading to its ultimate closure in 1884, less than 60 years after its completion. Despite providing a vital link in Pennsylvania's transportation network, the Union Canal was an early casualty of the canal era. Its demise brought about by poor decisions, unfortunate weather circumstances, and increased competition. Ironically, what could have been one of the first major canals built in America became one of the first canals in America to fail. To put this into perspective, other canals managed to survive far longer, despite growing competition from railroads, some operating well into the 20th century. It's been more than 140 years since the canal was abandoned, and much of the right-of-way has slowly been lost to history. Some parts were taken over by railroads, others were reclaimed by neighboring farmers or by nature itself. But there are still things to see, including a couple of areas that are still well preserved even today. One such area happens to be just north of my hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, in Reading, as I mentioned before, the Union Canal shared the river with the Schuylkill Canal. The Union Canal ran along the western shore of the river to the confluence with the Tulpehocken Creek, thereafter following that creek on its western shore. The city of Reading itself has seen so much development and redevelopment over the years that the Union Canal remnants there are all but gone. Currently, Route 422, locally known as the West Shore Bypass, occupies much of the canal right-of-way in the area. But it is interesting to note that even before the highway was constructed in the 1960s, the canal there had already been repurposed once before. In 1890, just a few years after the canal operation ceased, the Reading Railroad gained control of the canal in Reading and proceeded to lay the Union Canal Branch Railroad right down the towpath to service businesses along the western side of the river. Here we can see the Union Canal Branch running up along the western shore of the river. Note the still operational Schuylkill Canal lock across the river, as well as a couple of canal boats. This aerial view from 1932 gives a slightly better view of the same area. We can even see what looks like the old canal bed next to the tracks. Compare that to this painting of the same area in the early 1800s, where we can clearly see the canal in operation at that spot. This was close to the original end of the canal. A flood in 1850 damaged this section, and subsequently the canal terminus was moved further north into the city. This 1860 map of Reading shows the new terminus of the Union Canal in the city, as well as the Schuylkill Canal on the other side of the river. In a way, it was convenient that the terminus was now at Lock 53, because that was also the location of the Union Canal offices in Reading. The towpath seen here was only a few years away from being converted into the Branch Railroad. The Union Canal Branch Railroad existed until the mid-20th century, but it was prone to flooding since it was situated right along the old canal towpath. It was eventually abandoned by the time the highway was constructed in the 1960s. The highway covers the old canal right-of-way, even after it branched onto the Tulpehocken Creek, but it eventually veers away, and it is north of this point that many Union Canal remnants can be found. But let's go back to the confluence of the Tulpehocken Creek and Schuylkill River first, because here is where the Union Canal Trail actually begins. I'm standing at the confluence right now, looking south along the Schuylkill River. The Union Canal would have run along the right side of the river here. As we turn to look north along the Tulpehocken Creek, the canal would have continued up that same side. In the distance we can see an old bridge pillar in the middle of the creek. This is a remnant of Bouchon's covered bridge. This bridge succumbed to arson in 1959, but it was built in 1857 while the Union Canal was still in operation. Here is a picture of this general area circa the 1870s, looking north along the Union Canal. In the far distance we can see Bouchon's covered bridge, but before that there are some other interesting canal structures, including lock number 52, and a building that seems to be perched above the canal. The purpose of that building was to weigh the canal boats. Here is a better view of that weigh house, albeit long after operations on the canal have ceased. Here we can see the old covered bridge abutment, pointing out toward the pillar remaining in the creek. Moving a little upstream, the Union Canal would have still been on the other side, and in fact, this is pretty close to the end point of the old branch railroad that used to run on the canal right-of-way. The creek looks a little weird right here because the old Bouchon Dam, which once sat right here, has recently been removed. To the south, we again see the old covered bridge pillar, but on this side of the creek, we also see an old smokestack and mill race remnants that belonged to the Bouchon paper mill, which existed at this location until the late 20th century. Here we can see the dam and the mill back during its heyday in a photo taken from across the creek. And here is a more recent photo taken just before the dam's removal, where we can see water still flowing through the race, as well as the remnants of some machinery in the lower left. With the dam gone, the mill race is empty now, but the machinery is still there, albeit a little overgrown. For the old paper mill, the smokestack still survives, along with some other piece of machinery next to it. The mill building itself is long since torn down, but the foundation remains, as well as some of the walls. Heading north on the Union Canal Trail, we soon come to this very much active rail bridge. No less than 3 trains went past while I was in the area, but unfortunately I was too far from the bridge each time. This bridge carries the old Reading Railroad's Belt Line, constructed in 1902 as a means of bypassing the city of Reading. Before its construction, through trains would have to go right through Center City with its many grade crossings. This is actually the second bridge at this location. I couldn't find any pictures of the old bridge, but its pillars and abutment are still here to see. There's another pillar out in the middle of the creek, but it is hard to see through the trees. Just beyond the bridge, we come to the Stonecliff Recreational Park. There is a nearby sign detailing some of the history of the Union Canal, as well as showing some informative maps. I do find it a little misleading that this is called the Union Canal Trail in this area, considering the actual canal and towpath were still on the other side of the creek at this point. But the canal right-of-way will cross over to our side in a little bit. The trail continues through Stonecliff Park, where I often hung out as a kid. I still can't get over how low the creek looks since the dam was removed. The park gets its name from the cliffs left over from a limestone quarrying operation that used to be here. As kids, it was a badge of honor to be able to climb all the way to the top. Back then, it seemed a lot higher than it does now, though. Here is a picture of the quarry in operation, taken from the Union Canal's position across the creek. We're going to skip ahead a little bit and actually cross the creek to the parking area for the Berks leisure area. Here, Highway 422 has finally veered away from the old canal right-of-way, so we can explore where the canal actually was. At the beginning of the driveway into the leisure area, we can look south onto what would have been the path of the old canal. The driveway here was built right atop where the canal ran through. Getting to the end of the parking lot, we enter the park itself. When I was younger, I thought for sure that this stone building was related to the canal in some way. But it was actually a private home that only dates back to the 1940s, long after the canal was gone. It now serves as headquarters for the park staff. This short branch of the Union Canal Trail does actually follow the path of the old canal on this side of the creek, but there is little to see in terms of canal remnants here. At best, in some places, you can tell from the contours of the land that the canal bed once passed through here. And we can see a bridge crossing the creek in the distance. As we come up to the trail that heads to that bridge, we are now pretty much on the old canal towpath. This footbridge is actually a modern replacement of the old mule bridge that carried the towpath across the river. The canal would have crossed the creek here before continuing up the eastern shore. Just downstream are some old stone ruins on the left. Those ruins, and a bit of rapids that we see in the creek, are actually the remnants of Strunk's Dam, which helped to provide a safe crossing for canal boats. Upstream from here, for the next couple of miles, the Tulpehocken Creek is relatively undeveloped, and the Union Canal remnants are numerous. On the other side of the bridge, we meet up with the same trail that we were on back in Stonecliff. Here I've backtracked down this trail a little bit to check out the dam remnants from this side. I could not find any pictures of the intact dam. But here we can see the old mule bridge. The bridge fell into disrepair after the canal operation ceased, and for a while only the pillars stood in the river to mark its location. Even those are long gone, but the new bridge sits approximately at the same site. As we approach the bridge from this side, the trail actually curves and goes through the remnants of Old Lock 51, as indicated by the stone walls on either side. I can't tell you how many times I rode my bike through this section before I realized there used to be a lock here. The limestone walls are long gone, but I did find what looks like some remnants here. And here we are obviously looking right down the canal bed, with the towpath continuing on the left side. The creek valley is so picturesque through here, but we're going to jump ahead again a little bit, this time to Gring's Mill Park. Here we are just south of the park. Somewhere along here used to be Union Canal Lock 50 and its two-story lockkeeper house. As you can see, no trace of it exists to the present day. In fact, it's hard to see the path of the canal here at all, because of subsequent development. But even that development is pretty old. The concrete bridge and dam here, along with the neighboring building, were constructed long after the canal in 1931 as part of a paint-making operation. The dam provided electricity for this endeavor. While these structures were not related to the Union Canal, they are still interesting to see, and they really illustrate just how long ago the canal operated. A whole other set of historical relics exist here that already postdated the canal by 45 years. While the dam was built much later than the canal, the mill across the creek does date back to 1811, and was likely serviced by the Union Canal. This picture shows a Union Canal boat being loaded at a similar type of mill. The bridge above the dam is paved, but it is not open to through traffic. Ever since I was a kid, I enjoyed peeking in the windows of this old building. For as long as I can remember, there's been a model railroad set up inside. Even before I used to ride my bike on the trails here, Gring's Mill was a frequent location for elementary school trips back in my youth. With such exposure to historic sites at a young age, it's no wonder that the past is a passion of mine. We're going to jump further upstream again, this time to the Berks County Heritage Center, which is home to a number of historic attractions. Among them are Wirtz's Covered Bridge, which we can see coming into view now. This bridge dates back to 1867, and at 204 feet in length, it is Pennsylvania's longest single-span covered bridge. Let's take a quick detour and check out the interior of the bridge. Even on a well-lit day, it is pretty dark in here. I used to like to come here at night, as a test of my courage by walking across in full darkness. The key was not disturbing the bats in the rafters. The small gaps in the deck are a little disconcerting, but the bridge is definitely sturdy. Nevertheless, this is another Tulpahawken Creek crossing that is not open to through traffic. In addition to the bridge, the park contains the Reeser Farmhouse, which dates back to the late 1700s. Its residents definitely got to see the Union Canal in operation. The barn we see in the distance houses a snack bar and the Union Canal Museum, which is unfortunately closed for the season. Continuing upstream from the covered bridge, the canal ditch is very obvious here, and it actually contains some standing water. It's amazing that there are so few trees growing in the canal bed here. Here we are coming to the remains of Lock 48. The house you see on the right is a little too opulent to be the canal tender's residence, but the property does date back to the canal era. This was actually the home of Captain Mockimer, who operated a boat on the canal between the local mills and downtown Reading. The sandstone is gone from the lock, but the foundational stone is still visible. Check out that big tree growing right in the middle of the lock. Directly on the opposite side of the towpath is a placard marking the location of the lock tender's house, which was a much more modest 1.5-story wooden structure. The sign says that the tenders earned between $1 and $10 a month to operate and maintain the locks. We can see from the surviving foundation just how small this residence was. Not too much further down the trail, we come to Lock 47, which is likely the best preserved Union Canal lock in existence. The reason for this is that it received a significant restoration in 1976, including stonework realignment and the installation of 4 new wooden lock gates. I think those gates were still here when I rode on this trail in my youth, but they are long gone now. I'm not sure if this orange mesh indicates some new restoration effort or not. I suppose it could just be to prevent people from falling into the lock. I like how this section has significant standing water in the canal to complete the effect of the restored lock. Here is the mounting point for one of the gates. The sandstone is all still present, and we can see the pockets in the sides where the lock gates would have sat. The tender's house would have been on the small strip of land on the other side, between the lock and the hill. At the end here, we can see a stone wall illustrating the increased height of the water on this side of the lock, and, of course, more gate mounting remnants. This lock looks narrow from the end, but remember that in the 1850s the entire canal was widened, and the width of the locks was increased from 8.5 to 17 feet. Originally the locks were half as wide, so you can imagine how that limited the canal boat size in the early days. Behind us, we can just barely see the overgrown ditch as it continues on upstream. Although it's not always overgrown, there are even some places where it seems like it was just recently drained. As we approach Reber's Bridge Road, which was the end of the trail when I was a kid, the canal follows this natural curve in the creek. The canal bed hugs right up against those cliffs on the other side, making me think it was actually carved out of the hillside here. The road bridge we see in the distance is a modern replacement for yet another covered bridge that used to cross the Tulpehocken Creek. Just before the road bridge was one of the many aqueducts on the canal. This one was a stone and wood structure that carried the canal waters over Plum Creek. The trail crosses Plum Creek on this iron truss bridge that sits roughly at the same location as the old aqueduct. Since the days of my youth, the trail has been extended 2 more miles, bringing it right up to Blue Marsh Dam and connecting it to other trails around the lake. Blue Marsh Lake was created in the late 1970s by damming up the Tulpehocken Creek. The main purpose of the project was for flood control, and the project was motivated by the severe flooding in the Redding area during Hurricane Agnes earlier in the decade. Besides flood control, the lake offers swimming, boating, and fishing among its recreational activities. But these came at a steep price because a lot of history was lost in the flooding of this area, and not the least of which was related to the Union Canal. Miles of the canal and multiple lock sites now sit at the bottom of the lake. Upstream of the lake's impoundment, the Tulpehocken Creek eventually returns to its natural course and boundaries in the vicinity of Bernville, PA. Now, the Bernville area greatly benefited from the canal's presence, and the area known as Newport developed south of the town, where the North Kill Creek flows into the Tulpehocken. This old 1861 map of the area shows just how built up Newport was, with warehouses, a distillery, a foundry, and a hotel. Note the rather complicated nature of the waterways here, with the canal actually crossing the North Kill Creek at grade level. Here is a photo of the area to better get a sense of how built up it was. The canal runs up the left side with Lock 36 clearly visible. A number of the buildings and even the lock remnants were visible here until the 1970s, when the area was cleared for the Blue Marsh Lake project. Between Bernville and the summit area at Lebanon, PA, there are some remnants of the old canal to be found. Unlike the areas we have explored here so far, these spots are not in a preserved park setting, and they are often difficult to reach, or they sit on private property. But there are spots, like here along Christmas Village Road, where you can see the abandoned canal ditch right next to the road. In Lebanon, PA, near the summit area, where the initial work on the canal started, not much remains. Back when the Union Canal was in operation, it flowed through an area that was then north of the city. Over the years since the canal was abandoned, the city has grown and largely repurposed the old canal right-of-way. There are still some indicators, though. Canal Street, for instance, is a lasting reminder that the Union Canal once flowed through this area. In West Lebanon, we also have Union Canal Drive, which was pretty much built right on top of the old waterway. At the end of this street, right next to this modern residential neighborhood, there actually is a restored section of the canal that leads to the most historically significant structure that still exists along the old waterway, the Union Canal Tunnel. Here we are entering the Union Canal Tunnel Park. This rock wall was erected as the endpoint of the restored section of the canal beyond. Looking the other way, we can see Union Canal Drive that sits on the location of the old canal bed. Around the side of this wall, we can see an old canal boat that may actually be original. There's also a more modern boat that is used for excursion trips up the restored portion of the canal and through the tunnel. This is one of my favorite places for a short walk, and the fall colors really help to make the area even more beautiful. I went to college not far from here, and it was then that I first discovered the tunnel's existence. I was of course familiar with the Union Canal in the Reading area from my youth, but in those days before the internet, researching its history was much more difficult. Discovering this park and the tunnel as a young adult renewed my interest in this historic canal and spurred my subsequent research into its history. It's likely that these sandstone blocks that line the parking area have been repurposed from other areas along the canal. This really is a fairly short walk, and we can already see the canal turning ahead as it approaches the tunnel. Now, that turn actually is historically significant. In the earliest surveys for the canal, there wasn't even going to be a tunnel at all. The canal would have followed a more westerly route along the Quittapahilla to the Swatara Creek, but there were concerns about water supply at the summit area. So the decision was made to go through the ridge instead and follow Clark's Run to an earlier meeting with the Swatara at the site of the eventual waterworks. This would also be the location where the branch canal would intersect with the main canal. The south portal of the tunnel and its surrounding area has been preserved by the Lebanon County Historical Society throughout the 20th century, even before they purchased the land in 1950. Renovations to the area in the late 1990s allowed for canal boat trips starting in the year 2000. And here we see the south portal coming into view. Work began on the tunnel in the spring of 1825, and it was completed in June of 1827, with the first canal boat passing through it at that time. The tunnel was originally 729 feet long, and the drilling was done mostly by hand, with some gunpowder being used to blast through slate and limestone veins. When the canal was enlarged in the 1850s, the tunnel was shortened to its current length of 600 feet. You'll notice that there isn't a towpath along the inside of the tunnel, like there is on the C&O Canal's Pawpaw Tunnel. Back during canal operation, the mules would be led on a trail over the ridge to meet up with the canal on the other side. The boats would proceed through the tunnel using wooden poles to push against the ceiling. There are a couple of plaques on the wall of the tunnel. The first marks its status as a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark, designated as such in 1970 for being the oldest existing transportation tunnel in the United States. The second plaque, from 1994, marks the tunnel site as a National Historic Landmark. For being such a historic location, I have never seen the place very crowded with tourists. Today, my only company are a couple of ducks floating on the canal waters. I wonder if they ever venture through the tunnel. I do marvel at how wide the canal is here, at this bend. I imagine it was so because the tunnel itself was a traffic bottleneck, so canal boats would have to wait here for their turn. Now, when I used to come here during my college years, this was the only accessible side of the tunnel. The other side was owned by the Historical Society, but it was overgrown and isolated behind private property. Around 2006, the North Portal and the surrounding area was developed, and today it is open to the public in a park setting just like on this side. So let's go check it out. In the parking area on the north side, we have an informative plaque and a small covered picnic area. From there, it's only a short walk down to the restored section of the canal. We can see a farm on the other side. This is representative of the fact that much of the length of the Union Canal ran through farmland, especially in the Lebanon area. I believe that little culvert over on the other side is where Clark's Run empties into the canal. Part of the development in 2006 was making a trail leading back to the north portal of the tunnel. The canal on this side of the tunnel seems a lot narrower than the other side, but that could just be because the foliage is so much closer to the water here. I'm actually very excited because I've never actually been to this side of the tunnel before. Oh, there it is, the North Portal. This side certainly has a different feel to it. No direct sunlight like we had on the other side makes it look a little more imposing in a way. I'm not sure where the mule path up the hill would be here. The terrain looks too steep, so maybe it would have come down to the canal further back. I have to imagine this wooden platform was part of the 2006 renovations to allow closer access to the tunnel. I also wonder if this stone wall here was part of the original portal, before the tunnel was shortened. That could also account for how different the stonework looks here, compared to the other side. I thought this stone here was a date marker, and it might actually be, but if so, the date has been weathered away too much to read. but I guess that's to be expected considering its age. And honestly, it looks pretty good for a 200-year-old tunnel that could easily have crumbled to disrepair over the last 140 years of disuse. Instead, through the tireless efforts of historically minded people throughout the years, it lives on as a testament to the bygone canal age, from one of the earliest casualties of this all but forgotten form of transportation. Now, the Union Canal ran for over 100 miles in length during its peak, and I only covered a few small areas here. I may visit more of the canal in the future, but honestly, that might be unnecessary because another YouTube channel has already covered it extensively. The Wandering Woodsman has done an extensive 66-episode series exploring what's left of the Union Canal along its entire length. I highly recommend checking out the series if you want to see more remnants of this historic canal. Well, I hope you liked this brief tour of some spots along the old Union Canal in Pennsylvania. For having such a brief existence so long ago, there is still a lot to see for the Union Canal, and we only scratched the surface in this video. If you'd like to see me visit more spots along the old canal, let me know in the comments. Also, please consider subscribing so that you don't miss any future content. Until next time, I'll see you later.